Hi, friends. My show, America Can We Talk, starts in just a few minutes, but I had to do a very special jump in right now to share some amazing breaking news. Two great stories. Just had to get them out to you right away. Number one is just now, the Department of Justice announced they are dropping all charges against Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. We have followed this story closely. We've had his attorney, Sidney Powell, on the show numerous times. This is among the most exciting news out of Washington the longest time, because for the first time, the Department of Justice is tacitly admitting they had absolutely no reason to go after Lieutenant General Michael Flynn to start with. The notes, which we talked about last week on the show, the notes that were forced out eventually by the Department of Justice into the hands of the defense attorney for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, made very clear that inside the FBI, inside the DOJ, they were working to cook up a plot. They were framing Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Once those notes became public and everyone could see all of the bad actors inside the Department of Justice, and a few days have settled in, people try to figure what we do about this news, how we process it, the Department of Justice, as I said last week, would have no other alternative but to dismiss all charges. This is great news for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. He pled guilty back in December of 2017 after being just simply railroaded in a way no American citizen ever should be by a Department of Justice clearly determined to use him, to get to him, eventually to try to use him, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, the former National Security Advisor for President Trump, as a means to take down President Trump. This is great news just for him. Secondly, it's great news for Americans who've been waiting a long time to find out whether we're ever going to get to the truth of what happened inside the FBI and the Department of Justice, not just after President Trump took office, but even before that in 2015, 2016, all of the abuse of power that was engaged in by the Obama administration, the Obama era administration of the DOJ, Department of Justice, FBI, all of that weaponizing of those federal law enforcement agencies on behalf of President Obama, the Democrat Party, using them to destroy a Republican opponent. This is where we are headed. This is just the tip of the iceberg to get the DOJ to drop charges against Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. As we move forward, I am extremely hopeful that you're going to eventually have Attorney General Barr and U.S. Attorney Durham able to convince a grand jury to bring indictments against a whole host of truly bad actors who not only engaged, it appears, in crimes against American citizens, innocent American citizens, but did so as part of a plot, as part of a mission to destroy the Trump presidency, to oust or overthrow this president who was duly elected, to essentially substitute their judgment of whether this guy ought to be president for that of the American people. It was to take away the duly elected president of the United States. That was the DOJ was up to. That is just what we hope is eventually going to come out within the next few weeks and months, is not just this wonderful dismissal of charges against Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, but even more broadly, the exposure of the kind of political corruption that was happening inside the Obama administration era, DOJ and FBI, and carried on into the time even after President Trump assumed office in January 2017. Second amazing breaking story I have to tell you about today. Those of you who listen often know that I'm based in Dallas, Texas. And in Dallas, we have been, in Texas largely, we've been under a shutdown order because of the coronavirus problem. And so we've had Texas under an order where all, in the government's definition of the term, non-essential businesses had to be shut down. Here in Dallas County, we had one woman who owns a hair salon who defied that order, defied the governor's order, defied the order of the Dallas County government here, and kept her salon open. Her name is Shelley Luther. She kept her salon open. It caught national press attention because she simply, she's not a political person. She's not engaged in a political battle. She just kept saying, I need to feed my children. I can't pay my rent. I'm behind in my bills. I have to be able to run my business. because of the extreme politicizing, the political agenda the left is engaged in this country, she was treated horribly, finally arrested, and ended up having to go before a judge here in Dallas County a couple of days ago. This judge behaved in a manner just impossibly condescending and rude and ruling class elite, and told her, since she'd been operating her salon, and to be very clear, following all the social protocols, all of the keeping the masks on, all the protection for herself, her employees, and her customers, this judge, she was dragged before a judge. She was sentenced to 7 days in jail and actually immediately taken from the hearing off to jail. And there has been a tremendous effort, which I've been part of along with others, to say you can't send an American citizen for going to jail for operating her business in an otherwise lawful manner. Well, the great breaking news of today is that the reason this judge had any ability at all to send an American citizen to jail for opening her hair salon was because of an executive order issued by the Texas governor, Governor Abbott, in which he basically said, if people don't follow this shelter in place, closing all non-essential businesses, that they could be subject to a fine and imprisonment. He gave, in his original order, he gave the authority for this judge to send this woman to jail. So what's happened today, another just great breaking news in Texas, is that the governor of Texas decided he changed his executive order. He modified his order. He made it so he took out all the provisions that would allow anyone to be sent to jail for violating the shelter-in-place rule. And he made that change retroactive, and then was able to go right to the Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, and get a ruling issued that said, release this woman immediately. So while I'm speaking to you, Shelley Luther is either already released from the Dallas County Jail or will be very shortly. Many more elements of this story. I'll have to wait till next week to tell you, but many more elements about, and I just want to close this breaking news by saying, we're talking about both stories more, but what they both have in common is the idea that you in America, we in America, we have a right to demand justice. We have a right to demand freedom. You have to stay in the fight to have justice happen. To bring about justice, you have to stay in the fight. You have to be a fighter. You have to be a person who will not just surrender to the growing power of the government and to, in Michael Flynn's case, the corruption of our federal law enforcement agencies. It pays, it matters to persist, to demand truth, to demand that justice happens. You don't get it any other way than by staying in the fight, demanding truth, demanding justice. That is my breaking news for today. I want to urge you to hang on here. We're going to go right to my show. As I say, pre-recorded just yesterday, a great, great show you'll love. So stay tuned for the rest of America Can We Talk. Thanks for letting me do this little special breaking news today. Thanks for watching and listening to America Can We Talk. Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the virus, the left's weapon to destroy America. John Guandolo, founder of Understanding the Threat, joins me in studio. Fun to be here. And masks and social distancing are fruit of the poisoned models. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned. I am America.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth. America Can We Talk is sponsored by GC Works, a Dallas-based company performing advanced technology research in the oil and gas industry.
And hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. I've been saying it repeatedly in the last few days, but I want to start the show again today, start the first five by saying this. We have to start to recognize that the coronavirus, it was a serious problem. It is a unpleasant thing. We had to be dedicating our resources to help people and get what people needed to hospitals and healthcare professionals. But what it is now, America's response to the coronavirus threat is indeed a political battle. It is a battle to hold on to freedom in America. We need to recognize that what we're watching with extensions of shutdowns, extensions of essential businesses being closed, is an economic war on America. This is the left's determination to use this crisis to turn America more toward the radical left, to delegitimize President Trump, to treat him as though he's not handling it competently, to eventually destroy our economy and our country and bring it into what the left has always wanted, a government-controlled, socialist, Marxist, collectivist society instead of America the great, America the free. That is where we are. My second point today's first 5 is this. It really is time to get mad. It is time to get mad at the way we're being manipulated by headlines, by data, by every time any kind of information comes out. If anyone passes on from coronavirus, anyone who happens to have been prominent, any headline, there is never the willingness, the honesty, the integrity of the journalists, of the media to say, X number of people passed away, but actually 98% of people recovered. And look at all these recovery numbers. There's no honesty there. There is a perpetual effort to keep America worked up into a frenzy of fear. This is what the left is doing. It's what the media is doing. And we have to get mad and say, no, stop getting drawn in. Right here in Dallas County, where I live, we have ridiculous draconian orders still in place under our own Governor Abbott, who he's on the right side of the aisle, so I support him. But there have been just an extreme adoption by people who are in authority of the notion that they actually possess the right to decide if you get to have your freedom today. This is a very insidious, unspoken, and subtle shift in the entire American political conversation, in our political assumptions about America. The premise of America is that we have the right to live in liberty. That's the premise of America. You get up in the morning, you want to go to your job, you run a legal business, you're allowed to go. You can go to your job, the business owner can have that business open. We have, because of this crisis, begun to watch a flip in our culture, a flip in our society, where it's the norm to say, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to go to that kind of store today, or I don't know if I'm allowed to go to work. I don't know if the government will let me have my nail salon be open or not. I can go to Walmart, but I can't shop in the paint section. I can't shop in this section, only this section. People, we are surrendering liberty. The entire coronavirus, disastrous as it was, nasty as any virus is, we got off in this country on the wrong foot because of bad data that came out of England, bad data that came out of American institutions, and because of horrendous predictions about the number of deaths we're going to see, we went into a major lockdown of our country. And more Americans are waking up to this, but I'm telling you folks, where we are right now, freedom is what's on the ballot in 2020. The whole notion, not just can we finally please get America reopened, but what have we agreed as a society is our basic right to live in liberty? What have we agreed is no more now, because we see how scary a virus is, so we don't really think we any longer have the right to decide in the morning to get up and go to work, or to get up and open your business and bring your employees in. We have to recognize every little step along the way in which we have surrendered liberty in this country and decide no is the answer to all of it. We are going to fight back, because there's nothing the left likes more than taking away liberty, and not just taking it away by force, but changing the culture, the mindset of the American people away from the presumption of liberty and toward the presumption they want people to have, which is they'll let you know how much liberty you can have. And that, my friends, is today's First Five. So we have a guest in studio. First of all, in studio, I'm just saying, we have a guest in studio. So great to be here. We have John Guandolo joining us, and he's been on the show I think a lot of times. John Guandolo, a good friend and also a wonderful patriot. He is a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. He served in infantry as a reconnaissance officer in the United States Marines. He's a combat veteran. He served as a special agent in the FBI from 1996 to 2008. Was recruited by the recruited out of the FBI by the Department of Defense to conduct strategic analysis of the Islamic threat. He's the president and founder of Understanding the Threat, and he is here in studio today. So, hi, John.
Hey, great to be back on with you.
I'm a little wound up. I'm just happy to be here.
That was a great first 5. You got me fired up.
Well, good. Thank you. Okay, well, let's just jump right in. First of all, Understanding the Threat, great organization. People should check out your website, understandingthethreat.com. You should check it out, full of information. But I want to start with a story you had, and this is actually now from the end of March. But this whole coronavirus disaster for the world, everyone knows it started in Wuhan, and we know that much, or we think we do. But the question and the title of your article was, is there, and I'll just ask it this way, is there a reasoned basis to assume that the coronavirus was a Chinese biological attack?
So we have to begin with a couple. First of all, I want to say for your viewers and your listeners, you need to be open to the fact that when we know the full story, that this was I'm going to go all the way to the edge on this. This was a intentional release of coronavirus, specifically targeting the West, and was done in conjunction. I'm saying we need to be prepared to be open to this, conjunction with the U.S. Marxist and Communist Party here.
Yes.
In other words, Marxist and Communist operatives, including people in the political realm.
In the United States currently now. Yes.
Yes. We need to be open that is where this could end up. And here's some things. First of all, we know that this originated out of the laboratories in Wuhan. I know ABC just a number of days ago finally caught up and said, hey, the Chinese appear to be lying about no kidding.
Do tell, yeah.
Welcome to the dance. But it's much worse than that. And there is certainly evidence on the table that this was not accidental. It was not some sort of accident out of the lab. And I think we'll find as time goes on that some of that information may come out. But even if that's not the case, that's kind of the all the way to the wall case, that this was intentional. It was coordinated with assets in the United States, communists, Marxists, and others. And it was in order that we have the response that you discussed in the first 5. But here's what we do know. As you mentioned in your first 5, the Chinese government has been very clear for years about their hostile intentions militarily towards the United States. We study things like the unrestricted warfare writing and what they say, and the basis of it is everything is in play. Everything's in play, nothing's out of play. But the way the Chinese, and this actually goes towards the Islamic threat also, but remember, the communists and the Chinese are working together. But the thing we need to understand is the way they fight war is very different from the way we fight war. They look to influence opinion, to drive it towards a direction, and then force an outcome. All in the information realm, subversion, all part of political warfare.
As a tactic of warfare, yes.
As a part of warfare. We think tanks, bullets, bombs, planes. That's how Americans think. Most European nations think that way, not all. But that's not the way China thinks. It's not the way Russia thinks. It's not the way they do warfare. And by the way, all along, both those countries, Russia and China, we'll focus on China, has been massively accelerating their military buildup. And so we need to look at this from all perspectives of warfare.
Okay, you mentioned unrestricted warfare, and we've talked about, you and I have, and other guests have, but that concept, it's actually the name of a book, Kuo Liang, probably mispronouncing, China's, this idea of unrestricted warfare. I think it was 1979, whenever it came out.
Right around there.
Yeah, where basically they're saying, these are Chinese military officials, high-level officials saying, we know that we probably can't, or we may not be able to beat America militarily, but we can engage in warfare in a broad variety of ways that Americans don't even see it coming. And that's how we Chinese will intend ultimately to become the single superpower in this world. Is that roughly right? And go ahead.
That's right. And let me just say that what I've tried to share with people, and we do this with all threats. So for instance, if we're looking at the Islamic threat and somebody says this individual who's now becoming kind of a prominent in this community, who's a Muslim, how do you assess this individual? And a lot of times I assess he's a part of the Islamic movement. How do you know that? Well, here's how we can have a high degree of reliability. And you walk through the things, whether it's people he's connected with, but a lot of time, because this is more, as you just articulate, this is much more a counterintelligence and political warfare, war and strategy. And therefore, we put these people into that format, and we say, do they fit, and what role are they serving? Well, in the same way, when we look at what has transpired over the last 2 to 3 months, we see that there is a lot that fits right into their model. And let me just make one point on that. Yeah. Yuri Bezmenov was a KGB official whose particular expertise was in subversion and political warfare for the Soviet Union. He defected in 1970 to Canada, ended up beginning to teach classes, and he's actually got things that have been captured on YouTube of him teaching classes about political subversion and political warfare. This is exactly what we're experiencing now. And when he lays out the 4 stages of the communist takeover: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, normalization. He assessed that prior to 1985, the United States had been demoralized, and it doesn't mean everyone's walking around with their head down. It means they've destroyed the very Christian underpinnings that our Constitution relies on, the founding principles as articulated in the Declaration. And they have done that and it's in their doctrine, it's in their goals that we know.
The
communist goals to get all forms of religion out of U.S. public schools, get the Bible out, all form of religion, to promote things like degeneracy and homosexuality and pornography and bizarre sexual practices. And now what do we see? We see things like the U.S. Air Force Academy allowing Wiccans, witches, to have their own little special. Oh yeah. So and what do we see being taught at Harvard and Yale, founded as Christian universities, now hold seminars for bizarre sexual practices. Like, that is out in the open. That's public. There have been reports on that. So from 1950 to today, we've seen that. He said prior to 1985, the destabilization, where you take over the foreign policy, the economic policy, and get into the defense system. And what do? You bring the government to a place where we bloat the budget, where we bloat the size of the government. And the federal government becomes this bloated cow. And what have we seen, right? And then you have the crisis, which you said. You're talking about coronavirus. This is that crisis. It's certainly a crisis. And in that crisis, you exert the federal power, you strip the liberties, you actually hopefully get to a point where martial law or something like it becomes a reality, and then you normalize this behavior. So as the crisis abates, as the crisis fades, you begin pushing full-blown communism, government control of things, and all the things that you've talked about on your show recently. And the things that we've written about, that I've written about at Understand the Threat, line up with that. You just look at, you've got lawsuits by locales and states against private businesses because their prices during this whole crisis, which we now know is complete BS. Is coronavirus real? Of course it's real. However, none of the models were even close. They were wildly over-exaggerated. So it means the people doing the models were either grossly incompetent across the board, or there was an intentionality to it, or the data they were being given was completely fictitious. And what we see coming out of that is a model that says, oh my God, 2 to 3 million people are going to die in America from this. Maybe even 100 million or more infected and all this. And the infection rate's not the problem. Right. It's the lethality rate. And what we now know, just last weekend, almost a week ago, the CDC backed their numbers down from over 80,000 to 60,000 of deaths. We've got the reports from Project Veritas that death certificates are being marked with COVID regardless of whether they died of COVID or not. And I just had conversations today with individuals where they've personal examples of people who died of terminal illnesses, but because they were with COVID, that's on the death certificate. And these families are outraged. But this is what's going on. And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, I forget the question I asked. No, actually, we were talking about the idea of coronavirus being a possible Chinese biological attack. I think more Americans are awake than ever have been before. We used to think China was our friend, and there was a lot of talk in America early on about we opening up to China when we trade with them and they trade with us, and they're going to see how beautiful freedom is, and they're going to be more like us because they're going to see how great capitalism is and how well it works. But the actual thing we've been doing with China is funding the growth and strength of the totalitarian Chinese Communist Party, which has at its root the idea not just to have communism pushed out around the world, but to really have Chinese communists, the Chinese people themselves, be the entity, be the one that's going to rule the world. This is very helpful to people starting to realize this. Gordon Chang's talked about in the show, numerous other people, to recognize them as an actually dangerous enemy. And to your very first point, you were saying we have to be awake to the idea or open to the idea that this virus was, at least it was created in the lab. It's not the wet market story, is from the lab, but then it was perhaps intentionally released, or I don't even know if you're mistakenly released, but then silenced and to let it flow. But that actually, and the piece I want to get back to is that this may have been more coordinated with people in our country who have had a very long mission. The Communist Party of America, the Democrat Socialists of this country, the radical left of this country has very much wanted communism and, whatever you want to call it, Marxism, socialism, be the norm in America. So the notion that they would in any way have been connected, that would be staggering. That would change everyone's recognition of how dangerous the left is in this country.
I would go a step further and say I think it would be absurd to think that the Communist Party, the Comintern from China, from other areas, wouldn't be coordinated. We know they coordinate with the Communist Party USA and with all of their affiliates like Freedom Road Socialist Organization and all of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and by the way, the Democrat Party of the United States. Now, the Democrat Party of the United States, the communists stopped running candidates, Gus Hall in 1984, who was the leader of Communist Party USA, because they had the Democrat Party.
Who was doing their bidding, more or less.
I've said this before, but Trevor Loudon produced a great piece that we promote frequently, but he objectively looks at all the members of the House of Representatives, and of those, how many of them are overtly Marxist communists? Top 50, and 50 out of 50 are Democrats. And the reason is because they're not covert communists anymore. They are overtly socialist Marxist communists. They are very clear about who they are and what they're doing. When people ask, how do we know what they're doing here? We have decades of information. By the way, you can just read the Communist Manifesto if you're unclear about what they're doing. And you can go to the websites of the Revolutionary Communist Party or Freedom Road Socialist Organization or Communist Party USA or Democratic Socialists of America, which many Democrat members of Congress and the Senate as well and leaders openly affiliate with.
The Democrat Socialists of America.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a communist organization. Okay, let's be very clear. And you have members of Congress. And where are the FBI investigations? Where are the charges against these people for what they're doing? Because some of them have violated the law across the board. Okay, but put that aside for a second. We know because we have testimony from KGB officers who have defected. We have testimony from Communist Party USA officials that have left and testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee. We have the years of investigations of the House Un-American Activities Committee about the Communist Party in this country. We have declassified FBI documents. We have the Venona intercepts from World War II that went forward of Soviet intelligence that was captured, that we captured, by the way, that lists names of a number of Americans. I don't remember the exact number, somewhere around 60 Americans that were actually mentioned between Soviet intelligence activities. We have all of that. And by the way, we've got Vasily Matroikin's files, a Soviet KGB archivist for 30 years that brought his notes of KGB operations for 3 decades. When you put all that together, we get a very clear picture of the communist movement. And we know today that the Democrat national leadership is at the tip of the spear of the communist movement, that they coordinate effort with other organizations. And some members of Congress have actually traveled to meet with communist leaders. So this is not something that's vague. We know what they're doing and how they're doing it in many cases.
You know, it's a very interesting thought I had while you were talking about how, at least in the time I was growing up, I think the time you were growing up, we used the expression that you have the communist world and the free world. We had a very clear distinction that the Western civilization, Western countries like America, are free. That is the premise of our society. In the last, and I don't know when to attribute it, because you're describing things been happening for decades, but it has been kind of not known by a lot of people, known by people like you who worked in, intelligence, but most people just figure the communists are there, that's them, we're us, we're free. Only in the last, I don't even know what to say, 10 years or 15 years, there has been a slow shift where we have ideas that really are socialist ideas, really are Marxist or communist ideas, have become legitimized and normalized in American political conversation, in American assumptions, where people say, well, okay, so yeah, she's a socialist, she seems like a nice person. I mean, people made a big splashy deal about the fact that you had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, absolute strident Democrat socialist, and Bernie Sanders getting close to the nomination, Democrat side. But what those people publicly did was begin to normalize those ideas, which for most of American history, most of us knew were simply inconsistent with, can't work with, can't live with the premise of freedom in America. So what do we do about that?
Well, I think you've nailed it, and you said it again in your great first 5 opening, is that we have to recognize people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, they're enemies of the United States. And people that stand behind them are either really ignorant, which is in many cases the point, just listen to them speak on TV. But these people, the Bernie Sanders of the world and the Beto O'Rourke's of the worlds, and those people, these are Marxist communists. These are people tied to very dangerous ideologies who are part of a movement to bring down liberty and the constitutional republic. And for people like you and I who understand that, and people that, like myself, have taken an oath of office, and this is for everybody that's ever taken an oath of office, you have a duty to, with everything you have, defend against that. The fact that our government intelligence agencies would allow a Bernie Sanders to even be a candidate. The fact that Gus Hall was a candidate the 4 times he was shows that even back then, our system you cannot elect a communist to be the president of the United States because they intentionally cannot and practically cannot fulfill their oath of office. They're unqualified. Now, you can have legal people and constitutional scholars say anybody can run. No, that's not what the founders said. That's not what they said at all explicitly. But this is where we are. So the recognition of where we are, the recognition that these people are enemies of liberty in the United States. And then, as you said, we have to be ready to take action.
We do. And I tell you something else that's just an astonishing, we talk about the coronavirus, how it seemed to have mesmerized Americans. We got so caught up in the fear, and then so caught up in the notion that somehow government can keep me safe. If I do what they tell me, and I stay home and I wash my hands, and I wear my mask, and I socially distance, I can be safe. The country was mesmerized by that concept. In the same way with respect to socialism and communism, it is sold in ways by Beto O'Rourke's and AOC, all sorts of people, that it's not scary. The way they sell it is we're about wanting justice. Who doesn't want justice? Justice for the poor. I noticed even a Hillary Clinton clip recently, she was blathering on about the coronavirus, but she said, but we have to have economic justice and healthcare justice and racial justice. They sell these horrible ideas of Marxism, collectivism, and communism in very American terms, alluring terms that dupe people into thinking, oh, well, I'm in favor of justice. I'm in favor of safety. And so we get, I don't know if there's really a question here. It's more of a conversation, but I'm troubled by their ability to lure people and dupe people by happy sounding patriotic language.
So I have two thoughts on that. One, let's put it into context. You had the leader, the head of the FBI and CIA, admitted communists. James Comey admitted when he was a young man he was a communist, and he has admitted that even today the ideological driver in his life is Reinhold Niebuhr, a deceased socialist leader, Marxist. You've got John Brennan, who publicly said he voted for Gus Hall, the Communist Party USA candidate, and somehow, because the CIA is so freaking broken and has been for decades, that they allowed him to join the CIA. That right there. So if anybody watching or anybody is unsure of how corrupted all the major components of the federal government are, I don't know what else to tell you. There is an ongoing coup against the President of the United States that's now in its fourth iteration. And are you paying?
You're talking about the response to coronavirus is its fourth iteration.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, you look at all of these things that are happening, and this isn't going to end, folks. When coronavirus is done, we got the murder wasps. We got something else that's going to be the next thing, and all they're trying to do is tie a 500-pound anvil around the president's neck, so that if he happens to get reelected, from their perspective, then they'll just weigh him down for another 4 years with another whole series of things, and they will attack him from all directions. That is where we are. The biggest problem when you talk about how do we, are people paying attention? I think tens of millions of Americans have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And I think they see it, and they're seething, and they're looking for leadership and guidance in what to do.
Which leads me to one point about President Trump, whom I did not support in the primary, whom I defend. I am thrilled with his agenda, his leadership, his strength, his tenacity. He will not back down. They went after him with the Russia-Trump collusion, and then they went after him in the Ukraine and all the other little things they thought up. And he's so strong and he's so good. What he's not been able to do well, and I don't know, so we need help in this. He's not been able to identify this coronavirus policy that we embraced as an attack on him. And that's the next step needed. It needs, what you're saying here, what I'm saying here, has to be articulated at the national level by many people, that this is no longer a discussion about healthcare. This is a discussion about, this is the next coup attempt against him, and I don't know who's going to do that, but someone's got to be defending him at that level, on that point.
That's absolutely right. You just described it. Mr. Trump's a one-man army. And he is
God bless him.
He is being attacked in a coordinated effort in all directions by the Marxists and communists. You've got the media openly defending communist China and coming against the President of the United States. You've got Nancy Pelosi saying we're going to block attempts to figure out where this coronavirus came from.
Okay, say that again. I don't know if our listeners even know about this.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi is interfering, is blocking attempts to get to the root of the coronavirus, right? The whole thing, because she knows where it goes. because she's up to her eyeballs in it. She is as corrupt and as dirty as any politician in the United States of America. And she is as anti-American as they come. And this is the problem. But, people say, what about Biden and Pelosi? Do you think they're hardcore communists? No, they could be. They could be. They certainly hang out with a lot of them. She had a Chinese driver for years who's a communist, and no charge against. It's unbelievable. But it's only unbelievable if you don't recognize that there's no functional counterintelligence apparatus in the United States, not in the FBI or the CIA, not functional at all. And then you've got people advising the President of the United States. But this is the point, if I make no other point today. Communists acting like communists shouldn't surprise us from a national security realm. When Democrat leaders act like red communists, if that surprises you, you're way out of the game. When jihadis, suit-wearing jihadis or gun-toting jihadis act like jihadis and that surprises you, I don't know what to tell you, right? The Islamic advisors inside the government, so far as we can tell, 100% of them hostile to the United States. All the components of government have been compromised by the communists. And what Mr. Obama did was place quite a number of them deep in the bureaucracy, so they're not just appointed people that you can pull out. There's going to have to be an overt, very aggressive effort to purge the federal government as a start. The establishment Republicans are the biggest threat to the Republic because they have sat on their hands. Some are overtly helping the other side, and their activities are most dangerous because they're the ones we and Americans are looking to actually do their duty.
To rescue us.
And they're not. Folks, let me tell you, as plain as I can say it, American citizens, you're the answer. You're the government. The American citizens are going to have to take this back. When you have good people like Sean Hannity look at a group of Americans exercising their right to keep and bear arms and saying, I believe in the First and Second Amendment, but this has gone too far. No, this hasn't gone far enough. We have a tyrannical federal government that in and of itself is split between patriots and the corruption that has got to be purged. And it's got to come hard and it's got to come fast. And Mr. Trump is standing almost all alone fighting this battle.
He most certainly is. John Guandolo, we're going to have you come back another time and talk about you made just one allusion to the high level people who are Islamists inside our federal government. And we also had the story, which I can't even get to now, but what happened in Minneapolis, where we now have I forgot the name of the bells, but the sound going out from the
call to prayer.
The call to prayer, yeah, but there's
for Muslims.
Yeah, there's a name for it. Anyway, in Minneapolis, we have enabled what many Muslims see as the surrender of America, because now we have the call to prayer to mosques going out on loudspeakers throughout Minneapolis. So we'll have to hit that another day. Can't get to it. So John, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much for having me. I was just going to say another example, because that whole thing was ushered in over years by communists and suit-wearing jihadis.
In Minnesota. Okay, yes. We used to have a whole day about Minnesota. I think I've told you before, my dad grew up in Minnesota. I've been to Minnesota dozens of times. I have dozens of cousins there, who are like Norwegian Lutherans. But anyway, I digress. I would love to talk with you about Minnesota and not if it's ever rescuable. But John, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, folks, one last story I want to hit very, very briefly, and that is, I made this point a little bit going along in our discussion about coronavirus, but I want to try to make it in a very punchy, pointed way, and that is this. You can hear all sorts of people who are conservative, who, generally speaking, love the Constitution, love liberty, believe in America, but in this coronavirus era, they are the absolute militant, must socially distance, must wear a mask, must comply with the law. And I want to make a couple points that really, really matter to begin to plant the seed for why you should be able to speak up against that and to resist that. The reason we got started on social distancing and wearing masks was because of the really bad data that came out of England that had models that were just grotesquely inaccurate, predicted millions of more deaths and hundreds of millions of cases and all sorts of suffering, things we could not imagine. And we had similar data come out of the University of Washington. So in response to that bad data, we made bad policy. The whole notion was just basically freeze the country, try to restrict the spread of this virus by making everybody stay at home. We've talked about this on the show, and you can go back and listen to past shows about the evidence that's come out now by Dr. David Katz at Yale, Dr. Atlas at Stanford, Dr. Yodanis at Stanford. Many doctors have been saying, who are microbiologists, immunologists, saying, now that we have the real data, now that we're not having to base policy off of bad models, but we're looking at real data, we overreacted. We have not in American history ever, as I've been calling the shutdown, we have not imposed house arrest on the healthy in any other virus. We quarantine people who are highly contagious in some circumstances because we want to stop the spread, but we have agreed to house arrest for the healthy in this country, all based on bad data. The shutdown was based on bad data. The social distancing requirement was also based on bad data. It sprung from the argument that the model is so bad, the virus is so contagious, that the only way to save America and even have life on Earth again is if we all stay away from each other. Social distancing is like in the law, they say you can't introduce evidence in trial if it's fruit of the poisonous tree. Basically, if you did a search, police did a search without a warrant, they come up with evidence, you can't put that evidence in trial. They say, is anything that the prosecutor is trying to introduce fruit of the poisonous tree? It's a well-established principle in criminal law. Back to this case, social distancing and wearing masks are both policy choices we came up with, which are fruit of the bad model, the poisonous model that was inaccurate. There is no reason for law-abiding Americans to think that they need, in order to be safe, to continue to engage in social distancing or wearing a mask, with a couple of caveats. There are people who are very susceptible. If my mother were still alive, because of their senior or they have some immune deficiency problem, if my mother was still alive and lived in the senior home near our home, I would, going there, do whatever they asked. I would wear a mask. I would want to make sure they felt safe, want to protect my mother. And other people who are vulnerable. So there is a caveat for if you're really in a position, or if you are very senior, or if you have some immune deficiency issue, then you should protect yourself, just as you did before the coronavirus came along. You took care of yourself given your health status. But we are surrendering liberty in this country when we are agreeing to bad policy, social distancing, wearing a mask, when we are just trying to live and function in our lives and go about our everyday life, open our business, go to work, function as free Americans. We have to start rejecting social distancing and masks, because it was as we are resisting the shelter in place or house arrest for the healthy, because it all sprang from the bad models, just factually incorrect data in the models that we followed. It's very important to understand, if you get that the data was bad, you get that the data now is indicating, yes, it's contagious, but you have a very low lethality rate. We did not have to do all that we did. We can start to live and function more normally. But the other side effect, I keep talking about all the side effects of this virus. One side effect has been how quickly we surrender liberty, how quickly we say, well, I'm going to get up today and wait and be told if I'm allowed to go to my favorite store because it's still shut down, or am I allowed to go to this restaurant? We've reversed our thinking and thought we're waiting to be told what we're allowed to do. And that is un-American. It's inconsistent with the idea of America. Another really bad side effect of this coronavirus has been the emboldening of some officials, local officials, police, sheriff's departments, engaging in otherwise unacceptable, aggressive, ridiculously terrible behavior toward free citizens, because they've become infested with the fear. They've bought into the pandemic of fear. And I have, Matt, the very wonderful producer, has a clip I want to show you very quickly. This actually happened in New York City, which you're going to watch. You'd think these police officers were taking down a bank robber or a serial killer. This, which you're going to watch, is the police in New York dealing with someone who failed to socially distance. Matt the Wonderful has this clip, I do believe.
Yo, nah, y'all go to jail. Go to jail. Move back. Move back right now. Move the back right now. Move the back. Move the back. What you flexing for? Don't flex. Be a lost dog too. Look. He ain't even do nothing. He ain't even do nothing. Look. He ain't even do nothing.
Okay, the only good news that came out of that astonishing display of violence, and by the way, that little, I don't even know what to describe it as, rat-a-tat-tat little noise, that was a taser. A woman is being arrested and tased for not social distancing. But the good news, one little good news was out of New York City, the Police Benevolent Association of the City of New York put out a tweet. That association calls for the end of NYPD News policing of social distancing as the weather heats up and the pandemic continues to unravel our social fabric. Very insightful statement. The pandemic is unraveling our social fabric. Police officers should be allowed to focus on our core public safety mission. If we don't, the city will fall apart before our eyes. So even that police agency is recognizing you have hysteria, you have un-American conduct by sheriffs, police officers, mayors, county judges, governors, emboldened with the idea because they have the power to do what they can, they will, and they're continuing to take away the freedom of Americans and, almost more reprehensibly, engaging in violence toward people who basically decided they got a little bit too close to somebody else and didn't socially distance. We can't have this in America. Folks, I'm almost out of time today. I do as I like to at the end of every show, I like to talk with you about why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we started with our first story for today. We started with the virus as the left's weapons to destroy America. Americans are waking up. That's why we have protests all over the place. Whatever its origins and despite its classification as a public health issue, messaging manipulation to keep America locked down exposes the reality. America is under war-level attack from the left. The pandemic is just a tool. Freedoms are being surrendered. The Bill of Rights are being canceled. Leftists and government are ordering people to behave like serfs, not free citizens. New York City police tasing and beating people for inadequate social distancing. Americans must rise up in righteous anger to protect and defend their country. Next story, John Guandolo interview, evidence of COVID-19 as a bioweapon. I hope you read his entire piece. It's available at our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows. Drop down, list of links, read his articles. Cultural Marxism and Islamism on full display and on full speed ahead during this pandemic. The COVID Act Now, which we talked about, the data we talked about many times on the show. COVID Act Now, manipulating data to promote fear, justify extended lockdowns. Dallas County voted, that was a couple of days ago, going to mail-in balloting, which is the Vote Fraud Enablement Act of the Democrat Party, voting in all mail-in balloting, guaranteeing leftist victory. Minneapolis agrees to air a Muslim call to prayer, interpreted by Muslims as conquest. Government decides which businesses can or cannot be open. The American people see what is happening. Too many leaders are ignorant or too cowardly to stop it. Americans must rise up in righteous anger and protect and defend their country. Last one, masks and social distancing, fruit of the poisoned models. The New York Police Department Benevolent Association calls for an end to policing social distancing, a pragmatic absurdity, preventing the policing of real crime. Americans must focus on and be aware that every bit of the social distancing and masks protocol is a product of faulty models that gave rise to faulty medical advice. Credentialed, serious U.S. medical experts are screaming, stop these protocols. No more social distancing or masks. They are retarding the normal development of immunities. We've talked about in the show many times. This is time for course correction in America. Americans, again, must rise up in righteous anger to protect and defend their country. And that, my friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Thank you so much for tuning in every Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time. You can email me at americacanwetalk@gmail.com. Whatever social media you're using to listen to the show, you know what to do. Please do it. Like, share, subscribe, whatever it is, please do it. I love talking with you every single chance I get, because what I'm really doing is speaking up for this extraordinary, precious gift of human liberty, which is America. I speak up for America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
Like a crashing wave. Can you hear us now?
America, Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can